The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. My hands, steady now after years of practice, rested on the polished mahogany table. Across from me sat two young men in tailored suits, their resumes gleaming with promise. Top universities, internships at Fortune 500 companies, recommendations that read like love letters. They didn't recognize me, but I recognized their last names. Ms. Morrison will be conducting your final interview today, my HR director had said, gesturing toward me with professional courtesy. The taller one, broad shoulders, confident smirk, extended his hand first. Pleasure to meet you, ma'am. I'm Derek Hutchins. The other followed. Ryan Hutchins. We're brothers, actually. Hutchins. That name had been carved into my memory for 17 years. Carved with the same blade that had split my life in two on a Tuesday morning when the world still felt safe. When I still believed that hard work and a good heart were enough. I shook their hands. My smile was practiced, professional, immaculate. Please sit down. They sat, eager and unsuspecting, while I opened their files. Derek's resume listed his father as a reference. Jonathan Hutchins, senior partner at Hutchins & Associates. Ryan's mentioned the same firm under his summer internship experience. Jonathan Hutchins. The same man who had sat across from me at a different table, in a different lifetime, when I was 26 and desperate. The same man who had leaned back in his leather chair, the kind of chair that cost more than my monthly rent, and said with a smile that wasn't quite kind, "Sarah, I appreciate your ambition, but let's be realistic. A single mother with no degree and a gap in her employment history. Who's going to take that seriously?" I had been asking for a loan. Just enough to finish my certification program. Just enough to give my son and me a chance. He had laughed. Not cruelly, not intentionally, but with the casual dismissiveness of someone who had never known hunger. Maybe focus on stability first. Find something simple, secretarial work, maybe retail. Leave the business building to people who have the foundation for it. His wife had been there too, Patricia Hutchins, sitting beside him with her pearls and her pressed linen suit. She had touched his arm gently and added, "Jonathan's right, dear. It's not that you couldn't succeed, but realistically, with a child to raise alone, the odds are just, well, they're not in your favor. And we can't invest in something that's statistically unlikely to pan out." I had left their home that day with nothing. No loan. No encouragement. Just their pity and their certainty that I would fail. Now, 17 years later, their son sat in my office. "So, gentlemen," I began, my voice steady, professional, giving away nothing. "Tell me what you know about Morrison Technologies." Derek spoke first. His confidence bordering on arrogance. "Well, obviously everyone knows Morrison Tech. You're one of the fastest growing software companies in the region. Started from nothing about 15 years ago, right? Self-made CEO story. Very impressive." 16 years, I corrected gently. "Not 15. Right, 16. He nodded, unfazed. "Anyway, my father actually mentioned he knew the founder personally. Said she was, well, he said she was persistent. The way he said persistent carried an unspoken asterisk, the kind that suggested stubbornness rather than strength." Ryan chimed in, softer spoken but equally assured. "We're really excited about the opportunity. Our father's firm has connections throughout the industry, and we think we could bring a lot of value to your team. Plus, with our educational background." "Your father knew me personally," I interrupted quietly. Both brothers paused, confusion flickering across their faces. "I'm sorry," Derek asked. "Your father, Jonathan Hutchins, he knew me. I met with him and your mother when you were both just children. I let the words settle between us like cards being laid on a table. I asked him for a business loan. $15,000. I had a business plan, a certification program lined up, and a 6-year-old son at home who deserved a better life than the one I could give him working double shifts at a diner." The confidence drained from Derek's face. Ryan shifted uncomfortably. I continued, my voice never rising, never sharpening. Just steady. Just factual. "Your father told me I should focus on something simpler. something more realistic for someone like me. He said, and I quote, "Leave the business building to people who have the foundation for it." Silence filled the boardroom like water rising. I didn't get the loan. Instead, I worked 3 jobs for 2 years while taking night classes. I slept 4 hours a night. I missed my son's school plays and parent-teacher conferences. I ate ramen and wore the same interview outfit to every pitch meeting until the seams started to fray. I tapped their resumes with one finger. But I built this company anyway. From nothing. From less than nothing. From debt and doubt and every statistic that said I would fail. Derek's throat moved as he swallowed. Ms. Morrison, I had no idea. My father never. No, I'm sure he didn't mention it. I leaned forward, my eyes meeting theirs with the weight of every sleepless night, every rejection, every moment I had wanted to quit but couldn't because my son was watching. Here's what I need you to understand. Morrison Technologies didn't succeed because I had connections or family money or a prestigious degree. It succeeded because I refused to let people like your father define what I was capable of. Ryan found his voice, thin and uncertain. Are you saying you won't hire us? Because of what our father said 17 years ago. I sat back in my chair. My leather chair, the expensive kind that Jonathan Hutchins would recognize, and let the question hang for a moment. No, I said finally. I'm going to do something your father never did for me. I'm going to judge you on your merit, not your circumstances. I'm going to look at what you've built, what you're capable of, and whether you have the hunger and humility to grow. Because that's what real leaders do. Closed their files and stood. Your second round interview will be with my CTO tomorrow at 9 a.m. She was a single mother too, by the way. Started here as an intern when this company was just me and a laptop in a 1-bedroom apartment. Now she runs a department of 60 people. Both brothers stood, uncertain whether to feel relieved or ashamed. One more thing, I added as they reached the door. When you go home tonight and tell your father about this interview, please give him a message from me. Thank him. Thank him for telling me I'd fail. Because every time I wanted to quit, I remembered his voice saying I couldn't do it. And that was all the motivation I needed to prove him wrong. Derek nodded. His earlier arrogance completely gone. Yes, ma'am. As the door closed behind them, I walked to the window overlooking the city. 17 years. 17 years since that crushing meeting in the Hutchins dining room. 17 years of building, failing, rebuilding, and refusing to stop. My phone buzzed. A text from my son, now 23 and working as a junior architect across town. Dinner tonight, Mom? I want to hear about your day. I smiled and typed back. Absolutely. I have a story to tell you. But the story wasn't over yet. This was just the beginning of a reckoning I had never planned for, but one that had arrived nonetheless. Because sometimes justice doesn't strike like lightning. It builds slowly, deliberately, like a company grown from nothing by a woman who refused to accept that nothing was all she deserved. And tomorrow, when Derek and Ryan Hutchins told their father about their interview, Jonathan Hutchins would learn something he should have understood 17 years ago. The people you underestimate don't disappear. Sometimes they become the ones who decide your son's futures. The coffee in my cup had gone cold 2 hours ago. I stared at it anyway, watching the thin film form across the surface, because looking at cold coffee was easier than looking at the empty closet where his clothes used to hang. It was 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. I remember because the digital clock on the microwave blinked at me in that aggressive red way that felt accusatory, like it was judging me for still being awake when I should have been getting ready for my shift at the diner. But I couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't process the note that sat on the kitchen table, creased from where I'd folded and unfolded it 17 times, as if the words would change if I just read them differently. Sarah, I can't do this anymore. I need to find myself. You'll be fine. You're strong. Take care of our boy. Michael. 23 words. That's what 6 years of marriage and a 5-year-old son amounted to. 23 words on the back of a gas station receipt. He'd left at 3 a.m. I'd heard him moving through the apartment, the soft scrape of his duffel bag against the hallway wall, The careful click of the front door trying not to wake me. But I was already awake. I'd been awake since midnight when he'd rolled away from me in bed with that sigh. The kind of sigh that carried the weight of decisions already made. Known. Maybe not consciously, but somewhere deep in the place where women store their worst fears, I'd known. My son Ethan was still asleep in his small bedroom with the glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck to the ceiling when we'd moved in. He'd been so excited about those stars, had made me promise they'd never come down. Even when I'm grown up, Mommy. Promise. Promised. Now I sat at our scratched kitchen table, the one we'd bought secondhand from a yard sale because we couldn't afford new, and I wondered how I was going to explain to him that his father had left us. That find himself meant more than finding us worth staying for. The rent was due in 12 days. I had $247 in my checking account. My shift at the diner paid $6.50 an hour plus tips. And on a good week, I brought home maybe $380. Our rent was $675. Michael had been working construction, bringing in another $520 every 2 weeks. I did the math in my head automatically, the way poverty teaches you to calculate survival in real time. We were $400 short. Minimum. The electricity bill sat unopened on the counter. So did the pediatrician's invoice from Ethan's last checkup. And the notice from the daycare about next month's payment being overdue. I picked up the note again, my hands shaking now, and read it for the 18th time. You're strong. Strong. As if strength paid bills. As if strength put food on the table or explained to a 5-year-old why Daddy wasn't coming home. The sun started to rise, painting the kitchen in that weak morning light that made everything look worse. I could see the crack in the ceiling we'd never fixed, the water stain from the neighbor's leak upstairs, the peeling linoleum that curled up near the sink. This apartment had never been much, but it had been ours. Now it was just mine. Mine and Ethan's. I heard him stirring in his room, the soft shuffle of his feet on the carpet, the creak of his door opening. Mommy! I folded the note quickly and shoved it into my pocket, forcing my face into something that might resemble normal. Good morning, sweetheart. He padded into the kitchen in his dinosaur pajamas, the ones with the hole in the knee I kept meaning to patch. His hair stuck up in that way that used to make Michael laugh. Where's Daddy? The question I'd been dreading. Daddy had to go away for work, baby. The lie tasted like acid. He's going to be gone for a while. Ethan climbed into the chair beside me, small and trusting in a way that broke something fundamental in my chest. Did he leave me a note? He said he loves you very much. Another lie. Or maybe not. Maybe Michael did love him, just not enough to stay. I didn't know anymore what the difference was. Okay. Ethan swung his legs under the chair, already moving on with the resilience of childhood. Can I have the cereal with the marshmallows? We didn't have the cereal with the marshmallows. We had the store-brand corn flakes that I'd stretched for 3 days. But looking at his face, his father's eyes, my stubborn chin, I nodded. Sure, baby. Let me see what we have. I poured him the last of the corn flakes and added just enough milk that it wouldn't look stingy. He ate happily, telling me about a dream he'd had where he could fly, while I sat across from him and calculated. If I picked up double shifts, if I could find weekend work, if I could somehow convince the landlord to give me 2 weeks. The phone rang. I jumped, hope flaring stupidly in my chest. Maybe Michael had changed his mind, maybe he was calling to say he'd made a mistake. But it was my manager at the diner. Sarah, I need you to come in early today. Brenda called in sick. What time? My voice sounded hollow. Can you be here by 8? I looked at the clock. That gave me an hour to get Ethan to daycare and myself across town on the bus. I'll be there. You're a lifesaver. She hung up without waiting for a response. Ethan looked up from his cereal. You have to work. Yes, sweetheart. But Miss Jennifer at daycare is excited to see you. He nodded, accepting this the way he accepted everything, with a trust that I was terrified I wouldn't be able to honor. After I dropped him off, watching him run into the daycare without looking back because he didn't know yet that people leave and don't return, I sat on the bus and let myself fall apart for exactly 3 minutes. I timed it on my watch, the one Michael had given me for our anniversary. 3 minutes to cry, to rage silently, to feel the full weight of abandonment and fear and fury. Then I wiped my face, straightened my uniform, and got off at my stop. Because Michael was right about one thing. I was strong. Had to be. I didn't have a choice. That was the morning I stopped being someone's wife and became just a mother. Just a woman with $247. A son who asked too many questions I couldn't answer. And a future that looked like nothing but closed doors. But I didn't know yet. Sitting on that bus, watching the city wake up around me, that 17 years later, I'd be sitting across from the sons of the man who would crush my dreams even further. I didn't know that the worst was still coming, or that surviving it would turn me into someone I couldn't yet imagine. All I knew was that Ethan needed breakfast tomorrow, and I had to figure out how to make that happen. One day at a time. One shift at a time. One breath at a time. That was how you survived abandonment. Not by being strong, but by being too stubborn to die. There was a time when I believed in Sundays. Not in the religious sense. Though we'd gone to church when Ethan was a baby, before Michael decided sleeping in mattered more than saving our souls, but in the soft, unhurried sense. Sundays meant pancakes. They meant Michael flipping them too high and Ethan laughing when they stuck to the ceiling. They meant the 3 of us crammed on our second-hand couch watching cartoons we'd already seen 17 times, because repetition felt safe, felt like routine, felt like family. I remember one Sunday specifically. It must have been October because the leaves were doing that thing they do in New England, turning the world into something that looked hand-painted. Michael had gotten paid on Friday, a good check, overtime included, and we'd decided to splurge. "Let's go to the pumpkin patch," he'd said, spinning Ethan in a circle while our son shrieked with delight. The real one, not the parking lot at the grocery store. It hesitated. The real pumpkin patch cost admission. It had hay rides and corn mazes and overpriced cider donuts that we definitely didn't need. But Michael had grabbed my hand, pressing the cash into my palm. "Come on, Sarah. When's the last time we did something just because?" He'd been right. We'd been so focused on making ends meet, on being responsible adults, that we'd forgotten what it felt like to be wasteful in the best possible way. So we went. Ethan had been 4, maybe 4.5, small enough that Michael could still carry him on his shoulders. We'd walked through rows of pumpkins while Ethan pointed at each one, declaring them perfect, before immediately finding another one that was more perfect. Michael had indulged him, carrying pumpkin after pumpkin to our growing pile while I laughed and said we couldn't possibly need 7 pumpkins for a family of 3. "But Mommy, what if they get lonely?" Ethan had asked with that devastating logic only children possess. We'd bought 4. Compromise. On the hayride, Ethan had sat between us, his small body warm against my side. The sun had been setting, painting everything golden, and Michael had put his arm around both of us, pulling us close. "This is it," he'd said quietly, so only I could hear. "This is everything." I'd believed him. We'd driven home with 4 pumpkins in the trunk and Ethan asleep in his car seat, his face smudged with dirt and apple cider. Michael had carried him inside while I'd brought in the pumpkins, and we'd put our son to bed together, moving around his room in that synchronized way couples develop when they've learned each other's rhythms. Later, in our own bed, Michael had held me and said, "I'm going to get that promotion. Another 6 months, maybe a year. Then we'll have enough for a down payment on a real house. One with a yard where Ethan can have a swing set." "We don't need a house to be happy," I'd said, but I'd been lying. I'd wanted that house. I'd wanted that swing set. I'd wanted proof that we were moving forward, not just surviving. "I know," he'd said, "but I want to give it to you anyway." That Sunday felt like a promise, like we were building toward something solid, something that would last. I think about that day more than I should. I think about how naive I was, believing that love and good intentions were enough, that working hard meant you got ahead, that family meant staying even when things got difficult. Because here's what nobody tells you about poverty. It doesn't arrive like a storm. It seeps in slowly, like water through a cracked foundation. First, it's just small things. skipping the name brand cereal, ignoring the hole in your shoe, saying maybe next month when your kid asks for the toy he saw on TV. Then the cracks widen. You're not skipping luxuries. You're choosing between electricity and groceries, between rent and the pediatrician, between keeping your phone turned on so your boss can call you for shifts, or keeping the heat on so your son doesn't shiver at night. Michael had started to feel it first. I'd see it in the way he'd check the mail, that tense set to his shoulders like he was bracing for impact. In the way he'd snap at small things that never used to bother him. In the way he'd stopped talking about the future and started talking about escape. Maybe I should go to Alaska, he'd said one night, about 3 months before he left. I heard they're paying big money for pipeline work. I could send money back. You'd be gone for months, I'd said, trying to keep my voice neutral. Yeah, but think of what we could save. Except it wasn't about saving. It was about leaving. About finding a version of his life that didn't include bills and responsibility and the slow, grinding weight of never having enough. I'd felt him slipping away, but I'd convinced myself I was paranoid. That love was enough to anchor someone. That a 4-year-old's laughter and a wife's devotion could compete with whatever fantasy life he'd been constructing in his head. The last good Sunday had been 3 weeks before he left. No pumpkin patch this time, we couldn't afford it. But I'd made pancakes from scratch, the cheap kind with just flour and water and a little sugar because we were out of milk. Michael had complained that they were too dense, that they didn't taste right. Ethan had eaten them anyway, drowning them in the last of our syrup, telling me they were the best ever, Mommy. Michael had gone to the bedroom and closed the door. I should have known then. Should have recognized that closed door as what it was. A rehearsal. But I'd been too busy trying to hold everything together, too focused on making dense pancakes feel like normalcy. Now, sitting at my kitchen table 17 years later in an apartment I actually owned, in a building I'd bought with cash from a company I'd built from nothing, I can almost taste those pancakes. Can almost feel Ethan's sticky fingers on my arm. Can almost hear Michael's voice saying, "This is it. This is everything." He'd been wrong though. That wasn't everything. Everything was what came after. The abandonment, the rejection, the years of scraping by and refusing to quit. Everything was learning that Sundays weren't sacred, that promises were just words, and that the only person you could truly count on was yourself. But sometimes, late at night when the city was quiet and success felt heavy instead of triumphant, I missed those cheap pancakes. Missed believing that 4 pumpkins and a man's arm around my shoulders meant security. I missed being naive enough to think that love could survive poverty. Because poverty doesn't just take your money. It takes your Sundays. It takes your pumpkin patches and your pancakes and your belief that good people get rewarded for trying hard. It takes everything you thought you knew about how the world works and replaces it with the truth. Nobody's coming to save you, and the only way out is through. The Hutchins lived on Maple Ridge Drive. I remember because I'd had to look up the address 3 times, convinced I'd written it down wrong. Houses on Maple Ridge didn't have numbers. They had names. The Willows, Brookstone Manor, Oakwood Estate. Their house was called Windermere. I'd taken 2 buses and walked 40 minutes because my car had died the week before and I couldn't afford to fix it. My feet ached in my only pair of dress shoes, the black pumps I'd bought for Michael's cousin's wedding 3 years ago, back when we still got invited to things. It was 2 p.m. on a Thursday. I'd arranged my diner schedule to take this meeting, losing 4 hours of pay I couldn't afford to lose. But this loan, this $15,000, would change everything. It would pay for my business certification course, cover Ethan's daycare for 6 months, and leave enough buffer that I could breathe for the first time in weeks. I had a business plan. 23 pages. I'd worked on it every night for 2 months after Ethan fell asleep, researching, calculating, projecting. Small business consulting for local restaurants, helping them streamline operations, reduce waste, maximize profit. I knew restaurants. I'd worked in 5 different ones over 8 years. I understood food costs and labor percentages and how to make a menu profitable. This could work. This would work. I just needed someone to believe in me. Jonathan Hutchins had been Michael's father's boss, back before Michael's dad retired. I'd met him twice at company picnics, Brief handshakes, polite smiles. When I'd called asking for a meeting, he'd sounded surprised but agreeable. Of course, Sarah. Always happy to help Michael's family. Come by Thursday afternoon. Patricia will make coffee. I stood at their front door, clutching my folder, and pressed the doorbell. Played a melody. An actual melody. Patricia Hutchins answered, wearing cream linen and pearls. Real pearls. The kind that glowed. Sarah, come in. Her smile was warm but didn't reach her eyes. Those eyes traveled down my outfit. My best blouse, slightly faded from too many washings. My dress pants with the hem I'd fixed with fabric tape because I didn't have time to sew it properly. I saw her see me. Really see me. See my poverty like it was something visible, something stained into my skin. Jonathan's in the dining room. Can I get you coffee? Or tea? Coffee would be wonderful. Thank you. The dining room had a chandelier. Crystal. The table could seat 12. On the walls hung oil paintings of people I didn't recognize. Ancestors, probably. Old money frozen in gilt frames. Jonathan stood when I entered, extending his hand. He was tall, silver-haired, wearing slacks and a polo shirt that probably cost more than my rent. Sarah, good to see you. Please sit. Sat. Placed my folder on the table. Tried to look confident instead of desperate. Patricia brought coffee in china cups. Real china with tiny painted flowers. My hands shook slightly as I lifted mine. So, Jonathan began, leaning back in his chair. That expensive leather chair that sighed under his weight. Michael's father mentioned you've been having a tough time. We were sorry to hear about your situation. My situation. As if abandonment was something that happened to me, not something done to me. I appreciate you meeting with me. My voice came out steady. Professional. I wanted to discuss a business opportunity and the possibility of a small loan to help me get started. I opened my folder. Slid the business plan across the table. Jonathan glanced at it. Didn't pick it up. What kind of business? Restaurant consulting. I have 8 years of experience in food service, and I've identified a gap in the market for. And you're asking for how much? Patricia this time, her voice gentle but pointed. $15,000. I've outlined the repayment plan on page 19. 18 months, 6% interest, monthly installments of $15,000. Jonathan finally picked up the business plan. Flipped through it without really reading. That's a substantial amount. It's actually quite modest for a business startup, I said, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. Most small businesses require $30,000 to $50,000 in initial capital. I've kept my costs extremely low by. Sarah, he set the folder down. His eyes weren't unkind. That was worse somehow. Let me be frank with you. I appreciate your ambition. Really do. But we need to be realistic here. Realistic. That word again. I am being realistic, I said. I've done the research. I've calculated the projections. This business model is viable, and I have the expertise to. You have a 5th grade education, Patricia said softly, as if saying it quietly made it hurt less. High school, I corrected. I graduated high school, and I'm enrolled in a business certification program at the community college. That's part of what the loan would cover. A community college certification. Jonathan folded his hands. Sarah, I'm not trying to be cruel, but the restaurant business is incredibly competitive. 90% of new restaurants fail within the first year. And you're proposing to consult for them when you yourself have never run a business. I've managed 3 different restaurant shifts. I've done inventory, scheduling, vendor negotiations. As an employee. His voice was firm now. Not as an owner. There's a difference. I felt something crumbling inside me. So you won't consider the loan? He exchanged a glance with Patricia. She touched his arm gently, a gesture of solidarity. Sarah, let's be realistic. There was that word again. You're a single mother with no degree and a gap in your employment history. You're asking for $15,000 with no collateral, no cosigner, and frankly, no real business experience. Who's going to take that seriously? The coffee in my cup had gone cold. I stared at it. Banks won't lend to you, he continued, his voice taking on a teaching tone, as if he was doing me a favor by explaining reality. Your credit score is probably shot after Michael left. You have no assets, no safety net, and you have a child to support. Even if you got this business off the ground, which is statistically unlikely, what happens when Ethan gets sick? When you have an unexpected expense? The business fails, and then you're in worse shape than you are now. I wouldn't fail, I said quietly. Statistics say otherwise. He pushed the folder back across the table toward me. Sarah, I'm not trying to discourage you. I'm trying to protect you. Michael's father was a good man, a loyal employee. I feel a sense of responsibility toward his family, so I'm going to give you some advice. Focus on stability first. Find something simple, secretarial work, maybe retail. Something with steady hours and benefits. Save up a little cushion. Get yourself on solid ground. Leave the business building to people who have the foundation for it. People who have the foundation. People with money. People who could afford to fail. Patricia leaned forward, her voice honey-sweet with condescension. It's not that you couldn't succeed, dear. But realistically, with a child to raise alone, the odds are just, well, they're not in your favor. And we can't invest in something that's statistically unlikely to pan out. Understood. My legs felt numb. Thank you for your time. Sarah, Jonathan started, but I was already moving toward the door. I appreciate you seeing me. I'll show myself out. I walked through their perfect house with its crystal chandelier and its ancestor portraits and its china coffee cups. Walked past their lives that had never known hunger or desperation or the specific humiliation of begging someone for a chance they wouldn't take themselves. Outside, the afternoon sun was too bright. I stood on their circular driveway. They had a circular driveway, and looked back at Windermere with its climbing ivy and its professional landscaping. Then I walked past the other mansions with their stupid names. Past the manicured lawns and the BMWs and the lives I would never have. I walked for an hour before I let myself cry. And when I finally stopped crying, something else filled the space where hope had been. Something harder. Something that tasted like metal and fury. They didn't believe in me. Fine. I'd believe in myself enough for all of them. I applied to 47 different positions in 32 days. I know because I kept a notebook, a cheap spiral one from the dollar store, and I wrote down every application, a date, the company, position, the outcome, rejected, rejected, no response, rejected, no response, no response, rejected. The no's came in different flavors. Some were form letters that started with, "Thank you for your interest," and ended with, "We've decided to pursue other candidates." Some were emails that arrived at 11 p.m., as if the sender wanted to bury bad news in the dark. Some were just silence. Applications that disappeared into a void where hope went to die. I was applying for office jobs. Administrative assistant, receptionist, data entry clerk. Anything with regular hours and benefits. Anything that paid more than the diner. But every application had the same section. Employment history. And my employment history had a gap. 7 months when I tried to make it work with just the diner shifts while Ethan was a newborn. 7 months that might as well have been 7 years, based on how employers looked at them. Can you explain this gap? They'd ask in interviews, the rare ones I actually got. I was caring for my infant son, I'd say, trying to sound professional instead of defensive. And you don't have childcare arranged now? Always that question loaded with assumptions. I do. He's in daycare. Don't mention that the daycare is barely licensed, that it's run by a woman named Rita who watches 6 kids in her living room and charges cash only. And what happens when he gets sick? When the daycare is closed? I'll manage. What else could I say? That I had no backup. That my mother lived 3 states away and couldn't help even if I asked. That Michael's family had stopped returning my calls the day after he left. The interviews always ended the same way. "We'll be in touch." They never were. At night, after Ethan fell asleep, I worked on Plan B. If no one would hire me, I'd hire myself. I started with what I knew: restaurants. I typed up a simple proposal on the library computer. Restaurant efficiency consulting, reduce costs, increase profits, and printed 50 copies. Each copy cost 15 cents. $7.50 I couldn't afford to spend. I walked into every restaurant within a 3-mile radius. Mom-and-pop places, chain restaurants, diners like the one I worked at. "Is the manager available? I'd like to discuss a business opportunity." Most didn't let me pass the hostess stand. "Leave your information and someone will call you." Nobody called. The ones who did let me speak to the manager listened for maybe 90 seconds before cutting me off. "We're not interested in consultants. We already have a system that works. Maybe when we're bigger." That one hurt most. The assumption that I was offering something only successful businesses needed, when I was trying to help struggling ones survive. One manager, a guy named Phil who ran a pizza place on 4th Street, actually looked at my proposal, flipped through all 3 pages. "This is interesting," he said. "How much do you charge?" Practiced this answer. Kept my rate low because I needed the work more than I needed the money. $50 for an initial assessment. Then we can discuss a monthly retainer based on what I find. He whistled. $50 just to tell me what I'm doing wrong. To tell you how to save money and increase efficiency. Most restaurants lose 20 to 30% of revenue to waste and inefficiency. If I can identify even half of that. Yeah, but I don't have $50 to gamble on someone with no track record. He handed back my proposal. "Come back when you've worked with some other places. Get some references." "How do I get references if no one will give me a chance?" He shrugged. "That's the catch, isn't it? Good luck though. You seem smart." Smart. As if intelligence paid bills. I tried offering my services for free. "Let me do an assessment at no charge. If you don't find value in it, you owe me nothing." That got me 3 takers. 3 restaurants willing to let me spend hours analyzing their operations for free. The first was a Thai place called Bangkok Nights. I spent 2 full days there, my days off from the diner, watching everything. Inventory, prep, service, close-up. I filled a notebook with observations and typed up a 10-page report on the library computer. I'd found $2,400 a month in savings. Ordering inefficiencies. Overportioning. A vendor charging 15% above market rate for produce. The owner, a woman named Siriporn, read my report while I sat across from her in the empty restaurant. I watched her face, looking for signs of recognition, appreciation, anything. She set it down. "This is good work." Relief flooded through me. "Thank you. So, if you're interested in moving forward with a monthly consulting agreement." "I can't afford a consultant right now." She smiled apologetically. "Business is tight. But I appreciate this." "Really?" She didn't implement a single one of my recommendations. I went back 3 weeks later to eat there, spending money I didn't have on pad thai I could have made at home, just to check. Same vendors, same portions. Nothing had changed. The second restaurant, a burger joint, never even read my report. The owner took it, said thanks, and that was the end. The third, a failing Italian place that desperately needed help, implemented everything I suggested. Within a month, their food costs dropped 18%. They paid me nothing. When I followed up, the owner said, "I thought this was a free consultation. We never agreed to payment. I was hoping if you found value in my work, we could discuss an ongoing arrangement. Can't help you. Money's still tight. But tight enough to buy a new espresso machine the following week." I saw it through the window. Gleaming chrome, professional grade. At least $4,000. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and cried. Not the quiet crying I'd done on the bus after the Hutchins meeting. Full sobs that I had to muffle with a dish towel so Ethan wouldn't hear. I was working 3 jobs by then. Morning shift at the diner. Evening shift at a grocery store stocking shelves. Weekend shifts at a call center doing customer service for a credit card company. I saw Ethan for 45 minutes in the morning before daycare, and an hour at night before bed. On Sundays, my only full day off, I did laundry and meal prep and tried to be present while exhaustion dragged at me like an anchor. "Mommy, why are you always tired?" he asked one Sunday while we sat on the couch watching cartoons I wasn't really watching. "Just working hard, baby." "Are we poor?" The question gutted me. He was 6. He shouldn't have to know what poor meant. "We have everything we need," I lied. "Tommy at daycare said poor people don't have things. He said poor people are sad." I pulled him close, breathing in the kid smell of him. Shampoo and playground dirt. "We're not poor, sweetheart. We're just being smart with money." But we were poor. The kind of poor where you count coins to buy milk. Where you wear shoes with holes because new ones cost $60 you don't have. Where you lie awake calculating whether you can afford Ethan's field trip, or if you need that $40 for electricity. The night classes in business management started in September. I'd enrolled using a payment plan that let me pay $147 a month instead of the full $1,800 upfront. I went to class 2 nights a week from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m., after my diner shift, after picking up Ethan from Rita's, after feeding him dinner and helping with his kindergarten homework. I was the oldest person in the class by a decade. Everyone else was 20, 22, fresh out of high school with their whole lives ahead of them. They talked about their internships and their career goals like the world was this open field of possibilities. I sat in the back and took notes in handwriting that got sloppier as the semester progressed because my hands ached from carrying plates and boxes and the weight of constant exhaustion. But I learned. God, I learned everything. Business structures, marketing fundamentals, basic accounting, financial projections. And slowly, so slowly I almost didn't notice, something began to shift. Not in my circumstances, those were still terrible, but in me, in the way I saw myself. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something, even if no one else could see it yet. Even if the only evidence was a notebook full of rejections and a half-finished business course and the stubborn, stupid belief that this couldn't be all there was. It happened on a Wednesday in February, 14 months after Michael left. I woke up at 4:30 a.m. to the sound of Ethan coughing. Not the normal kid cough, the deep, barking kind that meant croup. The kind that meant a trip to urgent care and antibiotics we couldn't afford and missing work I couldn't afford to miss. I'd gotten 3 hours of sleep. My shift at the grocery store had run until midnight because someone called in sick and they'd begged me to stay. I'd said yes because I always said yes because saying no meant someone else got the hours next time. Ethan's fever was 101.3. His breathing sounded like gravel. I called out from the diner. My manager's voice went cold. "Sarah, this is the 3rd time this month. My son is sick. I understand, but we need reliable employees. I'm going to have to write you up." A write-up meant I was one incident away from being fired. One more sick day. One more emergency. One more moment of being human instead of a machine that produced labor for $8.25 an hour. The urgent care visit cost $120 even with my minimal insurance. The antibiotics were another $47. I paid with a credit card that was already maxed out, watching the transaction decline twice before finally going through on the 3rd attempt. We got home at 10 a.m. Ethan fell asleep on the couch. I sat beside him and stared at the bills spread across the coffee table. Rent, past due. Second notice. Electric, final notice before disconnection. Daycare 2 months behind. Rita had pulled me aside last week and said gently, "Sarah, I can't keep doing this. I have my own bills. Student loan from my certification program. 90 days delinquent. Medical bills from Ethan's last 2 doctor visits. In collections." I picked up my phone and opened my banking app. Checking account. Minus $37. Overdraft fees had eaten what little I had left. My hands were shaking. I was working 87 hours a week across 3 jobs. 87 hours. And I was still sinking. Still drowning in a debt that grew faster than I could bail it out. The math didn't work. No matter how I calculated it, rearranged it, stretched it, the math simply did not work. I needed $2,200 just to get current on everything. Just to reach zero. And I had negative $37. Something in my chest felt like it was cracking. Not my heart, something deeper. Place where hope lives. Where belief lives. The stubborn, stupid thing that had kept me going for 14 months. I walked to my bedroom, closed the door, and lay down on the floor. The carpet smelled like the cheap detergent I bought in bulk. My body ached everywhere. Feet, back, shoulders, places I didn't know could hurt. I closed my eyes and let myself think the thing I'd been refusing to think for months. I can't do this anymore. The relief of that thought was immediate and terrible. Like setting down a weight you'd been carrying so long you'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. Can't do this. I can't keep working 3 jobs and still failing. I can't keep telling my son we're fine when we're not. I can't keep believing that trying hard enough will be enough when the system is designed to keep people like me exactly where we are. Jonathan Hutchins had been right. The statistics had been right. Single mothers with no degree and no money don't build businesses. They survive barely until they don't anymore. I thought about calling my mother. About admitting defeat and asking if Ethan and I could move in with her in Ohio. She lived in a trailer park and worked at a gas station, but it would be one less rent payment. One less set of utilities. Maybe I could work at the gas station too. Maybe survival was enough. Maybe ambition was a luxury I couldn't afford. I thought about Michael and wondered where he was. If he ever thought about us. If he felt guilty or free or some combination of both. I thought about hating him, but I was too tired. Hate required energy I didn't have. I thought about Ethan and how he'd asked me yesterday if we could go to Chuck E. Cheese for his birthday next month. How I'd said, "We'll see," because I couldn't say, "We can't afford it," and I couldn't say yes when I knew it was impossible. I thought about the business plan still sitting in my desk drawer. 23 pages of dreams that nobody wanted to fund. 47 job applications that had gone nowhere. 3 restaurants I'd helped for free who'd taken my work and given me nothing in return. I thought about giving up, and for the first time it felt like wisdom instead of weakness. The floor was cold. I could hear Ethan coughing in the living room. In an hour I needed to pick myself up, make him lunch, call the landlord and beg for an extension, figure out which bill to pay and which to let slip further into delinquency. But for right now, lying on this floor in a bedroom I couldn't afford in an apartment I was about to lose, I let myself feel the full weight of failure. Tried. God, I tried so hard. And it hadn't been enough. Tears came then. Not the angry crying from after the Hutchins meeting. Not the desperate crying on the bus after Michael left. This was different. This was the crying of surrender. Of a body and mind and spirit that had finally reached their limit. I cried until there was nothing left. Until I was empty. Until I was just a woman on a floor with no answers and no energy and no reason to believe tomorrow would be different from today. And then, in that emptiness, something strange happened. In the silence after the tears, in the space where hope had died, something else stirred. Something smaller but harder. Something that didn't care about statistics or Jonathan Hutchins or credit card debt or the fact that I was completely, utterly beaten. Was a voice. My voice. Quiet but steady. Not yet. Not yet. Not today. Maybe tomorrow I'd give up. Maybe next week. But not yet. Because Ethan would wake up from his nap and ask for juice. And I'd get up and pour it for him. Because the rent was due and I'd call the landlord anyway. Would beg for another week anyway. Would figure something out anyway. Because I'd been tired before. I'd been broke before. I'd been rejected and dismissed and told I'd fail before. And I was still here. Lying on this floor, broken and empty and defeated, I was still here. Maybe that was enough. Maybe survival, brutal and unglamorous as it was, counted as resistance. Maybe getting up one more time, even when logic said to stay down, was its own kind of victory. I pulled myself to my feet. My reflection in the mirror looked like someone who'd aged a decade in 14 months. But she was standing. In the living room, Ethan stirred. "Mommy, I'm here, baby." I walked to him, sat down, put my hand on his forehead. Still warm but not worse. "Are you okay?" he asked, looking at me with those worried eyes that were too old for a 6-year-old. "I'm okay." Another lie. But maybe if I told it enough times it would become true. That night, after Ethan went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook of rejections and my impossible bills and my dried-out pen from the dollar store. I opened to a blank page and wrote, "Not yet." That was all. 2 words. But something inside me still pulsed. Faint. Image. Maybe dying. But not dead yet. 3 days after I'd lain on that floor contemplating surrender, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to church. Not the big church downtown with the stained glass and the organ music. The small one on Riverside Avenue that met in what used to be a hardware store. The kind of church where people showed up in jeans and nobody asked questions when you slipped in late. I didn't go because I'd suddenly found religion. I went because it was Sunday morning. Ethan was with Rita for a few hours. A favor she'd extended despite the money I owed her. And I needed to sit somewhere quiet where nobody expected anything from me. The service was already halfway through when I arrived. I sat in the back row, in a folding chair that squeaked when I shifted my weight. The pastor was talking about Lazarus, about resurrection, about things that looked dead coming back to life. I wasn't really listening. I was too busy staring at my hands. They were a waitress's hands. Rough, scarred from hot plates and sharp edges. My nails were chewed down to nothing because I couldn't afford to break the nervous habit, and polish seemed like a luxury from a different lifetime. These hands had held my son when he was born, had held my marriage certificate, had held Michael's hand on our wedding day when I'd believed in forever. These hands had also held mops and carried boxes and scrubbed toilets and typed up business plans that nobody would read. What else could they hold? What else could they build? The service ended. People filtered out, chatting about lunch plans and football games. I stayed in my chair, still staring at my hands. First time here. A voice beside me. I looked up to see an older woman, maybe 60, with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "Yes, I'm Margaret. You planning to come back?" I didn't know how to answer that. "Maybe." She nodded like this made perfect sense. "Well, if you do, we have a women's group that meets Tuesday nights. Nothing fancy. Just coffee and conversation. You'd be welcome. I work Tuesday nights." Then another time. She patted my shoulder and walked away, not pushing, not prying. I sat there for another 10 minutes after the building emptied. Sat in the silence of a converted hardware store that smelled like old wood and burnt coffee. And I made a decision. Not a loud one. Not dramatic. Just a quiet, internal shift that felt like turning a corner in my mind. I was going to build something. Not because I believed anymore that hard work guaranteed success. Not because I had faith in the system or in people like Jonathan Hutchins suddenly developing compassion. I was going to build something because the alternative, giving up, moving to Ohio, accepting that this was all I deserved, would kill something in me that I wasn't ready to let die. And if I was going to do it, I needed to do it differently. When I got home, I went to my closet. In the back, behind the clothes I never wore, was a box. Inside that box was my wedding ring. I'd kept it for sentimental reasons. For Ethan, maybe when he got older. Proof that his parents had once loved each other. Had stood in front of people and made promises. But sentiment didn't pay rent. The ring was simple, gold band, small diamond. Michael had bought it from a pawn shop when we were 21 and poor but happy. "It's not much," he'd said, slipping it on my finger. "But it's real. Like us. Real." What a joke. I turned the ring over in my palm, feeling its weight. Maybe $200 if I was lucky. Maybe less. $200 wouldn't solve anything. Wouldn't make a dent in my debt. Wouldn't change my circumstances. But it would buy me something else. Commitment. Finality. The symbolic severing of a past that kept pulling me backward. I put the ring in my pocket. That night, after Ethan went to sleep, I took out a fresh sheet of paper. Not from my notebook of rejections. That was the old story. This was something new. At the top I wrote, Morrison Technologies. Not Sarah's Consulting. Not Restaurant Solutions. Something bigger, Something that sounded like it already existed, like it had legitimacy and weight. Morrison Technologies. My maiden name. My identity before Michael. The person I'd been before marriage and motherhood and poverty had tried to convince me I was small. Below the name, I wrote a mission statement. To provide innovative business solutions that empower small businesses to thrive in competitive markets, while proving that success isn't reserved for those who start with advantages. The second part wasn't for clients. It was for me. A promise written down, made official by ink on paper. Then I wrote out goals. Not the reasonable kind that take circumstances into account. The audacious kind that make you uncomfortable. Year 1, 3 paying clients. $15,000 in revenue. Complete business certification. Year 2, 10 clients. $60,000 in revenue. Hire first contractor. Year 3, 20 clients. $150,000 in revenue. Rent office space. The numbers felt impossible. Absurd. I was a woman with minus $37 in her checking account writing down six-figure revenue goals. But something about putting them on paper made them feel less like fantasy and more like intention. Like I was sending a message to the universe or to myself that this was the direction I was heading, regardless of how impossible the journey looked. I folded the paper carefully and put it in my wallet, behind Ethan's school picture, where I'd see it every time I opened it to count coins or swipe my maxed-out credit card. The next morning, Monday, I went to the pawn shop on 4th Street. The one with bars on the windows and a sign that said, "We buy gold." The guy behind the counter had probably seen 1,000 wedding rings come through. Probably knew exactly what it meant when a woman walked in alone, holding a small velvet box. "How much?" I asked, setting it on the counter. He examined it with a loupe. "Bands decent. Diamonds small but real. I can give you $180. It's worth more than that. Maybe to you. Not to me." He pushed it back across the counter. "Take it or leave it." I thought about negotiating. Thought about walking out, trying another shop. But this wasn't about getting the best price. This was about letting go. "I'll take it." He counted out bills. 9 20s. I folded them carefully and put them in my wallet, next to my new mission statement and Ethan's picture. As I walked out of that pawn shop into the gray February morning, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Lightness. Not because I had $180. That wouldn't solve anything. But because I'd made a symbolic choice. I'd traded my past for a possible future. That money went toward 3 things. First, I paid Rita $60 toward what I owed her. Not enough to clear the debt, but enough to show I was trying. Second, I bought printer paper and ink cartridges. $37. Third, I opened a business bank account at the credit union. You needed a minimum $25 deposit. The account came with free business cards if you ordered them online. I ordered 500 cards. Sarah Morrison, founder and CEO, Morrison Technologies. CEO of nothing. Founder of a business that didn't exist except on paper and in my head. But titles are funny things. Sometimes you have to name yourself what you want to become before the world will see you that way. That night, I showed Ethan one of the cards when they arrived. "What's this?" he asked. "It's Mommy's business card. You have a business." "I'm building one." He studied the card with the seriousness only a 6-year-old can muster. "Can I keep this?" "Sure, baby." He took it to his room and put it on his dresser, next to his collection of rocks and the drawing he'd made of our family. Him and me, holding hands under a sun he'd colored bright yellow. The family Michael wasn't in anymore. The family that was just us now. As I lay in bed that night, exhausted from another double shift but unable to sleep, I thought about that card on Ethan's dresser. Thought about the mission statement in my wallet. Thought about the empty ring box in my closet. Nothing had changed. I was still broke. Still buried in debt. Still working 3 jobs just to stay afloat. But everything had changed. Because I'd made a promise. Not to Jonathan Hutchins or to the banks that rejected me or to the world that said single mothers like me couldn't build empires. I'd made a promise to myself. And promises, I was learning, were the only foundation you really needed. The first real client came from the last place I expected. A funeral. My landlord's mother died in April. Mrs. Chen had lived in the building for 40 years, had known everyone, had been the kind of woman who remembered birthdays and left cookies outside apartment doors at Christmas. I went to the funeral because it felt wrong not to. Because Mrs. Chen had been kind to me during a period when kindness was rare. Because she'd seen me carrying groceries up 4 flights of stairs when the elevator broke and had insisted on helping, even though she was 83 and I'd been terrified she'd fall. The funeral was at that same converted hardware store church. Small crowd. Mostly elderly people who'd known her from the neighborhood. I sat in the back again, in my same interview outfit that was starting to look worn at the elbows. I'd added a black cardigan I'd found at Goodwill for $3. After the service, there was coffee and cookies in the basement. The cheap kind, store-brand sandwich cookies and coffee that tasted like water with a rumor of beans. I was about to leave when someone tapped my shoulder. "You're Sarah, right? From the 4th floor." Turn. A man, maybe 50, with tired eyes and a suit that had seen better decades. "Yes. David Chen. Mrs. Chen's son. She talked about you. She was a wonderful woman. I'm so sorry for your loss." "Thank you." He paused, weighing something. "She mentioned you were starting a business. Consulting or something." My heart did something complicated. "Yes. Business efficiency consulting. I help companies streamline operations and reduce costs." "You got a card." I did. The 500 I'd ordered with my wedding ring money. I'd been carrying them everywhere, waiting for a moment exactly like this, terrified it would never come. He studied the card. "Morrison Technologies. Sounds legit." "It is. Please believe me. Please be the one person who believes me. I run a machine shop. Small operation, 12 employees. Books are a mess. Costs keep creeping up, and I can't figure out where the money's going. You think you could help with that?" This was it. The moment I'd been grinding toward for 16 months. "Absolutely. I specialize in exactly that kind of operational analysis. I can identify inefficiencies, vendor issues, process gaps." "How much?" Practiced this. Had rehearsed different price points, different pitches. But standing there in a church basement at a funeral, looking at a man who'd just buried his mother, I made a decision. Initial assessment is $200. That gets you a comprehensive report with specific recommendations. If you want to move forward with implementation, we can discuss a monthly retainer. He nodded. $200. That's reasonable. When can you start? I could come by this week. Thursday afternoon. Thursday works. He pulled out his wallet, extracted 4 $50 bills. Handed them to me right there. I stared at the money. $200. My first payment from a real client for real work that I'd pitched myself. "You need a receipt." "Managed. Thursday's fine. Just email me when you've got something." He walked away, back to the grieving relatives and the terrible coffee. I stood there holding $200, trying not to cry at a funeral for entirely different reasons than everyone else. That Thursday, I showed up at Chen Machine Shop at 1 p.m. I'd taken a personal day from the diner, unpaid but necessary. I'd printed my intake forms at the library. I'd bought a professional-looking clipboard from the office supply store for $8. David Chen showed me around. The shop was loud, greasy, organized chaos. Men working metal presses and lathes, sparks flying, the smell of hot metal and machine oil thick in the air. "Vendor invoices are in here," he said, showing me to a closet-sized office. "Books are in those binders. Good luck making sense of them." I spent 6 hours in that office. Missed Ethan's bedtime. Called Rita and begged her to keep him overnight. $40 I didn't have but promised anyway. But I found $3,800 in monthly savings. They were being overcharged for steel by a vendor who'd quietly raised prices over 2 years. Their electric bill was commercial rate when they qualified for industrial. They were paying for 3 software licenses they didn't use. Small cuts, death by 1,000 paper cuts. I typed up a 12-page report. Specific recommendations. Vendor alternatives. Contract renegotiation scripts. Process improvements that would save labor hours. I emailed it Friday morning, then waited. Checked my email 60 times that day. Nothing. Saturday. Nothing. Sunday morning my phone rang. Unknown number. Sarah. David Chin. I read your report. My stomach dropped. And this is incredible. You found $3,800 a month. Do you know what that means for a shop my size? It means you have breathing room. It means I can give my guys a raise. First time in 3 years. His voice cracks slightly. My mother always said you were smart. She was right. Thank you. So here's what I'm thinking. I want to implement all of this. And I want you on retainer. $500 a month. You handle vendor negotiations, keep an eye on the books. Help me fix this mess. Deal. $500 a month. Recurring revenue. A retainer client. Deal. I hung up and sat on my kitchen floor and sobbed. Big, ugly, grateful sobs that shook my whole body. $500 a month wouldn't change my life. But it was proof. Proof that my idea worked. Proof that I could deliver value. Proof that someone, just one person, believed I was worth paying. I called my certification program and made a payment plan to catch up on my delinquent tuition. I called the electric company and paid enough to avoid disconnection. I bought Ethan new shoes. His old ones had holes in both soles, and he'd been stuffing them with cardboard. And I updated my notebook. Not the notebook of rejections. I'd started a new one. Client number 1, Chan Machine Shop. $200 assessment plus $500 per month retainer. The next client came from David. He told his buddy who ran an auto body shop. That guy hired me to do an assessment. Found him $2,100 in monthly savings. He signed a $400 retainer. Client number 3 came from the auto body shop owner's sister who owned a small catering company. $300 retainer. By August I had 6 clients. Combined monthly revenue. $2,800. I quit the call center job. Still kept the diner and the grocery store, but having one night back, one small piece of my life returned. Felt like luxury. By November I had 11 clients. Combined monthly revenue. $6,200. I quit the grocery store. Just the diner now and my growing client list. By February, 2 years after Michael left, 1 year after I'd lain on my floor contemplating surrender, I had 19 clients and $11,400 in monthly revenue. I gave my notice at the diner. My manager looked shocked. You found another job. I'm running my own business. Your consulting thing. That's actually working. Yes, smiled. It's actually working. My last shift was on a Saturday. The other waitresses threw me a small party. Cheap champagne and a cake from the grocery store. They'd all watched me struggle, had covered shifts when Ethan was sick, had slipped me extra tips when they knew I was drowning. Speech. Someone called. I stood with my plastic cup of champagne, looking at these women who'd held me up when I couldn't stand on my own. 2 years ago, I didn't know how I was going to survive. Now I'm building something I never thought possible. And I couldn't have done it without you. Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. We drank our cheap champagne and ate our grocery store cake. And it tasted better than anything I'd ever had at Windermere. That night I took Ethan to Chuck E. Cheese. The birthday I'd promised him a year ago and hadn't been able to afford. Really? His eyes went huge. We can really go. Really? We played skee-ball and ate pizza, and I let him win tickets for prizes he didn't need. We stayed until closing, until he was exhausted and happy and covered in pizza sauce. On the drive home, he fell asleep in the back seat. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror. 7 years old now, missing his 2 front teeth, clutching a stuffed bear he'd won with his tickets. We're going to be okay, I whispered. Not to him. To myself. To the woman who'd lain on that floor a year ago, certain she was beaten. We're going to be okay. And for the first time since Michael left, I believed it. 15 years passed like water through fingers. Morrison Technologies wasn't a dream anymore. It was real. 37 employees, 2 office locations, clients across 4 states. We'd pivoted from restaurant consulting to full business operations software when I'd realized that what businesses really needed wasn't advice, but tools. So I'd hired developers, built platforms, created systems that automated the efficiency improvements I used to do manually. Last year's revenue, $8.3 million. Ethan was 22 now, graduated from college, paid for with scholarships and the money I'd saved in an account I'd opened the day I got my first retainer client. He was working as a junior architect, living in his own apartment downtown, calling me twice a week to tell me about his projects and ask if I was eating enough vegetables. My son worried about me. The irony was delicious. I'd moved out of that 4th floor walk-up 11 years ago. Bought a condo with a view of the river. Nothing extravagant. I'd never forgotten what it felt like to count coins for milk, but comfortable. Success had a strange flavor. Sweet, yes, but complicated. Because you never fully leave behind the person who slept 4 hours a night and wore shoes with holes. That woman lives in you forever, whispering reminders that everything you've built could disappear. I was at the office on a Thursday afternoon, reviewing resumes for a senior developer position, when my assistant knocked on my door. "Sarah, there's someone here to see you." He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's personal. Did he give a name? She glanced at the notepad in her hand. "Michael Morrison. He said you'd know who he was." The room tilted slightly. After 15 years, his name still had power. Not the power it once held, but the power of unfinished business, of questions never answered. "Should I tell him you're unavailable?" My assistant's voice was careful. She'd worked for me for 6 years, knew my story. Had seen the way I flinched whenever someone mentioned deadbeat dads. "No. Send him in." I had 60 seconds to compose myself. To remember that I wasn't the woman he'd left. I was the woman who'd built an empire from the ashes of his abandonment. The door opened. Michael looked older. Still handsome in that careless way some men age, but weathered. Lines around his eyes. Gray threading through his hair. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt, work boots that had seen better days. He stopped just inside the doorway, taking in my office. The floor-to-ceiling windows, the mahogany desk, the awards on the wall from business magazines and chambers of commerce. "Sarah," his voice cracked slightly. "You look successful." "I am." I didn't stand. Didn't offer him a seat. "What do you want, Michael?" He shifted his weight, uncomfortable. I heard about your company. Read an article in the business section. Morrison Technologies. That's really something." 15 years, I said. 15 years, and you show up because you read an article? I wanted to come sooner. I did. But I didn't know what to say. Didn't think you'd want to see me. You were right. I don't. He flinched. I deserve that. I deserve worse than that. Sarah, I was a coward. I was 27 and terrified, and I ran instead of staying. I've regretted it every single day since. Have you? It wasn't a question. And where did you run to, Michael? What was so important that you abandoned your 5-year-old son? Alaska. Pipeline work, just like I said. Then Wyoming. Then Texas. I moved around a lot, sent money when I could. We never received a single dollar from you. I sent it to your mother's address. The one in Ohio. A cold realization settled over me. My mother, who I'd asked for help twice and been refused because she was barely making it herself. My mother, who'd said she couldn't afford to help us. How much? My voice was ice. About $400 a month. For 6 years. Until I lost my job in Texas and things got complicated. $24,000. Money that could have changed everything. Money my mother had kept while I'd worked 3 jobs and fed my son ramen and worn shoes with cardboard in the soles. Get out. Sarah, please. I want to make amends. I want to meet Ethan, explain. You want to meet the son you abandoned. The son who cried himself to sleep asking why daddy didn't love him anymore. The son who watched me work myself to exhaustion because his father was too much of a coward to stay. I stood now, my voice rising. You don't get to walk back into our lives because you had a moment of guilt 15 years too late. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need you to know I tried. I sent money. I thought about you both every day. And when I saw that article, saw what you'd built, I realized you never needed me anyway. You were always stronger than me. You're right. I never needed you. I needed a partner. I needed someone who kept his promises. But I survived without you, and so did Ethan. We built good lives. And you don't get to claim any part of that. He nodded slowly, tears in his eyes that I felt nothing about. Can I ask? Is he happy? Ethan. He's extraordinary. He's kind and brilliant and hardworking. Everything you're not. I'd like to meet him, just once, to apologize. That's not my decision to make. He's an adult. If he wants to meet you, he'll reach out. But I won't facilitate it, and I won't encourage it. You made your choice 15 years ago. Now you get to live with it. Michael stood there for another moment, searching my face for something. Forgiveness, maybe, or absolution. He found neither. I'm proud of you, he said finally. For what it's worth. It's worth nothing. I sat back down, picked up the resume I'd been reading. My assistant will show you out. He left. The door closed. I sat in my expensive office in my successful company and felt nothing. Not triumph. Not vindication. Just emptiness where anger used to live. That evening I told Ethan about the visit. We met for dinner at his favorite sushi place. His treat because he'd gotten a raise and wanted to celebrate. He came to see you. Ethan set down his chopsticks, processing. After all this time. Yes. What did he want? To apologize, I think. To see if I'd forgive him. To meet you. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Do you think I should meet him? That's your decision, sweetheart. I won't tell you what to do. What would you do? Thought about it. Really thought about it. I'd ask myself if meeting him would give me closure or just reopen wounds. I'd ask myself if I needed anything from him, or if I was already whole without him. Are you whole without him? Yes, and I meant it. Everything I am, everything we have, I built that without him. He doesn't get credit for my success, and he doesn't get to diminish it by his absence. I am whole because I chose to be. Ethan smiled, that beautiful smile that had kept me going through every impossible moment. Then I think I'm whole too. I don't need to meet him. Had you? That was enough. We finished our sushi, talked about his new project at work, laughed about a story he told about his roommate. The evening was perfect and ordinary and everything I'd fought for. I drove home at 9:30 p.m., feeling settled. Feeling like I'd closed a chapter that had been hanging open for 15 years. I was unlocking my front door when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me hit the green button. Hello, Ms. Morrison. This is Patricia Hutchins. The name crashed over me like cold water. Jonathan's wife. I hope I'm not calling too late. My hand tightened on the phone. 17 years. 17 years since that dining room, that rejection, that dismissal. Mrs. Hutchins. This is unexpected. I imagine it is. Her voice was older, shakier than I remembered. I'm calling because I need to ask you something. About my sons. About Derek and Ryan. They interviewed with your company last week and her voice broke. I'm calling to beg you not to hold our past against them. The world seemed to stop spinning. I'll call you back tomorrow, I said carefully. We should discuss this in person. Thank you. Thank you so much. I hung up before she could finish. Stood in my doorway, key still in the lock, phone in my hand. And then the real reckoning began. I met Patricia Hutchins at a coffee shop on neutral ground. Not my office. I didn't want her in my space. Not her home. I would never set foot in Windermere again. A Starbucks on the east side, busy enough that we had privacy through anonymity. She arrived 10 minutes early. I watched her through the window, sitting at a corner table, hands wrapped around a coffee cup she wasn't drinking. She looked smaller than I remembered. Older. The pearls were gone, replaced by a simple gold chain. The linen suit had been traded for slacks and a cardigan. 17 years had not been kind to Patricia Hutchins. I walked in at exactly 3 p.m. She stood when she saw me, her face flooding with relief and anxiety. "Ms. Morrison, thank you for meeting me. I wasn't sure you would. Sit down, Mrs. Hutchins." We sat. The barista called out someone's complicated order. The espresso machine hissed. Normal sounds in a moment that felt anything but normal. "I'll get straight to it," Patricia said, her voice shaking slightly. "My sons told us about their interview. About what you said. About the meeting 17 years ago. And I'm here to apologize. What Jonathan and I said to you that day was wrong. We were dismissive and cruel, and we judged you based on circumstances instead of character. I've regretted it ever since." "Have you?" Kept my voice neutral. "For 17 years, you've regretted it?" "Yes." Her eyes filled with tears. "You have to understand, we were different people then. We had money and security, and we thought that meant we understood how the world worked. We thought success came from having the right foundation, the right education, the right connections. We were wrong. What changed? I wasn't going to make this easy." She took a shaky breath. "Everything. 5 years ago, Jonathan's firm was accused of financial impropriety. It was a misunderstanding, ultimately, but the investigation destroyed us. Clients left. His reputation was ruined. We lost everything. The house, the savings, Jonathan's partnership. He had a stroke 2 years ago from the stress. He's in a care facility now. Early onset dementia. Felt nothing. No sympathy. No satisfaction. Just curiosity about where this was going. I work as a bookkeeper now," she continued. "The boys put themselves through college with loans and scholarships. Derek works 2 jobs to afford his apartment. Ryan is still living with me in a rental because he can barely make his payments. They're good boys, Sarah. They work hard. They're nothing like we were. And you're here because you're afraid I'll punish them for your sins." "Yes." She met my eyes. "I'm terrified. They're qualified for those positions. They've worked so hard to get where they are. And I know that I have no right to ask you for anything. But I'm asking anyway. Please don't hold our past against them." I let the silence stretch. Let her sit with her fear the way I'd sat with mine 17 years ago in her dining room. "Tell me something, Mrs. Hutchins. When I left your house that day, when I walked out with nothing after asking for help, did you think about me again? Did you wonder how I was doing? If I'd survived?" She looked down at her coffee. "No. I'm ashamed to say I didn't. I thought so. Because people like you and your husband, people who've never known real struggle, don't think about the people you dismiss. You go back to your comfortable lives and you forget. While I worked 3 jobs. While I fed my son ramen because I couldn't afford anything else. While I wore shoes with holes in them and lay awake calculating which bills to pay and which to let slip into collections. I know. Sorry. I'm so sorry. Your apology means nothing to me." The words came out cold, factual. "It's 17 years too late, and it's motivated by self-interest. You're not here because you've had some moral awakening. You're here because your son's futures are in my hands." She flinched but didn't argue. "However," I continued, "your sons are not you. Derek and Ryan came into my office with no idea who I was. They were professional, prepared, qualified. They've worked hard to get where they are. And I meant what I said in that interview. I judge people on their merit, not their circumstances." Hope flickered across her face. "But I'm not going to make this decision lightly. I'm going to think about it. And while I think about it, I want you to understand something. The reason your sons are struggling, the reason you lost everything, isn't because the universe is cruel or unfair. It's because the system you benefited from for so long eventually takes from everyone. The difference is that people like me, people who started with nothing, we know how to survive loss. We know how to rebuild. You and Jonathan never learned that skill because you never had to. You're right, she whispered. I know I am. Understood. I'll make my decision about your sons this week. You'll hear from them directly. Sarah, Ms. Morrison, thank you. Thank you for even considering. Don't thank me yet. I left her sitting there, returned to my car, and drove back to my office. My hands were steady on the wheel. My heart rate was normal. I'd imagined that confrontation 1,000 times over the years, and in my imagination, it had been explosive, cathartic, world-shaking. The reality was quieter. Just two women in a coffee shop, one apologizing for wounds she'd inflicted, the other realizing that revenge was a hollow victory. Back at my office, I called my CTO into my office. Melissa Chen, David Chen's daughter, the first client who'd believed in me. She'd started as an intern 8 years ago, worked her way up through talent and determination. She was 32, a single mother herself, and the smartest hire I'd ever made. What do you think about the Hutchins brothers? I asked her. She'd conducted their second interview. Solid candidates. Derek's more experienced but a bit arrogant. Ryan's greener but hungrier. Either would be an asset. Knowing what you know about my history with their family, what would you do? Melissa didn't hesitate. Hire them. Both if we have room in the budget. Not because their mother begged you, but because we need good people and they're good people. Their parents' mistakes aren't theirs to carry. You're sure? Sarah, you've built this company on one principle. People deserve to be judged on what they can do, not where they come from. The moment you abandon that principle for revenge, you become just like them. Just like everyone who dismissed you because of who you were instead of what you were capable of. She was right. Of course she was right. Hire Ryan, I said. Give him the junior developer position. Derek can go to the other candidate. I think the woman from MIT would be better suited for the senior role. Ryan over Derek. Melissa looked surprised. Derek's more qualified. Ryan's hungrier. And humility matters. His brother needs to learn that being qualified isn't enough. You need to be willing to work for it. Melissa smiled. I'll send the offers out tomorrow. That evening I called Ethan. You sound weird, he said immediately. What happened? I told him everything. Michael's visit. Patricia's plea. The decision I'd made. Are you okay? He asked when I finished. I think so. I thought confronting them would feel better. More satisfying. Like I'd finally gotten justice. But it didn't. No. Just felt sad. Like closing a door that's been open too long. Mom, can I tell you something I've never told you? Of course. When I was little, maybe 9 or 10, I used to lie awake at night and fantasize about you becoming successful. I'd imagine you running a big company, and Dad showing up and being sorry, and everyone who'd ever doubted you having to admit they were wrong. It was like my favorite bedtime story. Oh, sweetheart. And now it's actually happened. You did it. You became everything I imagined and more. And you know what the best part is? What? You didn't need the apology. You didn't need Dad or the Hutchins or anyone else to validate what you built. You did it for us. For you. Because you refused to let them define what you were capable of. That's the real victory, Mom. Not them admitting they were wrong. But you proving you were right all along. Cried then. Not from sadness or anger, but from the overwhelming realization that my son, the boy I'd raised while working 3 jobs, the boy who'd eaten ramen and worn second-hand clothes and watched me struggle, understood what I'd been trying to teach him all along. That success isn't about revenge. It's about refusing to let other people's limitations become your own. I love you, I said. I love you too, Mom. And I'm proud of you. Not because you built a company, but because you stayed kind even when you had every reason to become bitter. After we hung up, I sat in my condo looking out at the river, at the city lights reflecting on the water. Tomorrow, Ryan Hutchins would get a call offering him a position at Morrison Technologies. He'd start at an entry-level salary, would have to prove himself just like every other employee. No special treatment, no acknowledgement of our shared history. And Patricia Hutchins would know that her son's future was secure not because of her apology, but despite it. Because I'd chosen to be better than her fear that I wouldn't be. The phone rang. Unknown number again. Hello, Ms. Morrison. This is Jonathan Hutchins. The voice was slower than I remembered, slightly slurred. A stroke. My wife told me she met with you today. I needed to call and say that I was wrong. About you. About everything. Mr. Hutchins, please, let me finish. You were right to build your company. You were right to succeed. And I was wrong to doubt you. I've spent 2 years in this facility thinking about all the people I dismissed, all the chances I didn't give because I thought success belonged to certain types of people. I was wrong. And I'm sorry. His apology, unlike his wife's, carried the weight of genuine remorse. But it still didn't change anything. I appreciate you calling, I said carefully. Your son Ryan will be receiving an offer tomorrow. I hope he takes it. You're hiring him. After everything I'm hiring him because he earned it. Not because of you and not despite you. Because of him. Silence on the line. Then quietly. Thank you. You're a better person than I ever was. No, Mr. Hutchins. I'm just a person who remembers what it feels like to be dismissed. And I refuse to make anyone else feel that way, even when I have the power to do so. I hung up and finally let myself feel it. The victory. The vindication. The proof that Jonathan Hutchins had been wrong about everything that mattered. But more than that, I felt peace. Because I'd won not by becoming like them, but by remaining myself. 6 months after Ryan Hutchins started at Morrison Technologies, I received a letter. It arrived at my office in a plain envelope, handwritten address, no return label. My assistant brought it with the rest of the mail, and something about it made me open it first. The handwriting was shaky but careful. Dear Ms. Morrison, this is Jonathan Hutchins. My hands don't work as well as they used to, so please forgive the messy writing. Ryan tells me you've been a wonderful mentor to him. He comes to visit me every Sunday and talks about what he's learning, about the culture you've built at your company, about how you treat people with dignity regardless of where they started. He doesn't know I'm writing this. I wanted to tell you something I couldn't say on the phone, something I need you to understand before my mind slips further away. You saved my son. Not by hiring him, though that was generous beyond measure, but by showing him what real leadership looks like. He's learning from you what I failed to teach him. That character matters more than credentials, that kindness is strength, not weakness, and that the measure of a person isn't what they have but what they do with it. I'm dying, Sarah. The doctors give me maybe a year. And I've been thinking about legacy, about what I'll leave behind. My firm is gone. My reputation is ruined. The money is spent. All I have left are 2 sons who, by some miracle, turned out to be better men than their father. That's because of their mother's influence, yes. But it's also because of you. Because you chose to be better than I was. Because you could have crushed them to punish me. And instead you gave them a chance to prove themselves. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that your kindness has a ripple effect you may never fully see. Thank you for being the person I should have been. Respectfully, Jonathan Hutchins. I read the letter 3 times. Sat with it in my office as the afternoon light faded and the building grew quiet around me. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove to Maple Ridge Drive. Windermere was gone. In its place stood a modern duplex. All glass and steel, nothing like the ivy-covered estate I remembered. The other mansions had mostly been torn down too, replaced by townhomes and condos. Even wealth, it seemed, couldn't survive time's erosion. I parked on the street where I'd once walked for an hour after being rejected, crying where strangers couldn't see. That woman felt like someone I'd known in another lifetime. Young, desperate, convinced that one closed door meant all doors were closed. What would I tell her if I could travel back to that moment? Not that it would work out. Not that success was guaranteed. Those would be lies, and she'd faced enough lies. I'd tell her, "You're going to survive this. Not because you're special or because the universe rewards good people. You're going to survive because you'll refuse to let other people's limitations become yours. Because you'll learn that the only approval you need is your own. Because you'll discover that rock bottom is just the foundation for rebuilding." I'd tell her, "The people who reject you aren't rejecting you. They're rejecting their own fear of what happens when someone without advantages succeeds. They're protecting a worldview where success belongs to certain people and everyone else should know their place. And when you succeed anyway, you won't just change your life. You'll crack their entire belief system." I'd tell her, "Forgiveness won't come easy. But it will come. Not because they deserve it, but because carrying anger is exhausting. And one day you'll wake up and realize that proving them wrong isn't what drives you anymore. What drives you is building something good. Creating opportunities for people like the woman you used to be. That's when you'll know you've truly won." I sat in my car on Maple Ridge Drive until the streetlights came on, thinking about Jonathan Hutchins dying in a care facility. His empire reduced to a letter written with shaking hands. He'd been wrong about me. Wrong about what determined success. Wrong about who deserved chances and who didn't. But he'd been right about one thing. Legacy mattered. And legacy wasn't about what you accumulated, it was about what you gave, who you lifted, what you taught by example. The next day, I went to visit Jonathan Hutchins. The care facility was nice. Patricia was using her bookkeeper salary to ensure her husband had dignity in his final chapter. The woman at the front desk directed me to room 237. He was sitting by the window, staring out at a garden he probably didn't fully see. The stroke and dementia had aged him 20 years. But when I walked in, his eyes focused, and something like recognition flickered there. "Sarah Morrison," he said slowly. "You got my letter." "I did. You came." He seemed surprised. "Why?" I pulled up a chair and sat across from him. "Because I wanted to tell you something. You were wrong about me. But I was wrong too." "About what?" "I thought success would taste sweet. That proving you wrong would feel victorious. But it doesn't. Just feels quiet. Like closing a door that's been rattling in the wind for too long." He nodded slowly. "I'm sorry. For that day. For everything. I know you are. And I accept your apology. Not because it changes the past, but because carrying resentment has become too heavy. I'm putting it down." "Forgiveness," he said softly. "I don't deserve it. Forgiveness isn't about what you deserve. It's about what I need. I need to let go of what you said to me 17 years ago. I need to stop letting that moment have power over me. I need to move forward as someone who builds instead of someone who proves." We sat in silence for a moment. Outside, birds sang in the garden. Life continuing, indifferent to human drama. "Ryan's a good boy," Jonathan said finally. "Better than I was at his age. He's learning fast. He reminds me of myself when I started. Hungry, humble, willing to work. Thank you for giving him that chance. I didn't do it for you. But I'm glad it brought you peace." I stood to leave. Jonathan looked up at me. This man who'd once sat in his expensive chair and dismissed my dreams as unrealistic. "Sarah, one more thing." "Yes. You built something real. Something that matters. I spent 40 years building wealth, and it all disappeared like smoke. But what you built, a company that gives people chances, that treats them with dignity, that's permanent. That's legacy. Thank you, Mr. Hutchins." I left the care facility feeling lighter than I had in years. The anger I'd carried like armor, the need to prove myself that had driven me through exhaustion and doubt. I set it all down in room 237 and walked out unburdened. That evening I met Ethan for dinner. He noticed immediately. "You look different," he said. "Did something happen?" I told him about the letter, the visit, the forgiveness I'd extended not because it was deserved but because I needed to be free. "Are you okay?" he asked, always my protector even though he was the child. "I'm better than okay. I'm at peace. For the first time since your father left, maybe for the first time ever, I'm not running from something or proving something. I'm just here, present, grateful. That's beautiful, Mom. You know what I realized today? The revenge I wanted wasn't Jonathan Hutchins apologizing. It wasn't even my company succeeding. It was becoming someone who didn't need revenge at all. Someone who could extend grace even when it wasn't earned. That's real power. That's real victory. Ethan reached across the table and took my hand. You've always been that person. You just had to survive long enough to see it. We finished our dinner and walked through the city, past the building where I used to work double shifts at the diner, past the library where I'd printed my business proposals, past the bus stop where I'd cried after being rejected. All the places where the old Sarah had struggled and survived and slowly transformed into the woman walking these streets now. Successful, yes, but more importantly, whole. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time in years. Today I learned that forgiveness is not a gift you give to people who've wronged you. It's a gift you give yourself. It's permission to stop carrying stones you were never meant to carry. It's the choice to build instead of burn, to create instead of destroy, to love instead of hate. I learned that success without peace is just a different kind of poverty. That wealth without wisdom is hollow. That proving people wrong matters less than becoming someone right. I learned that the woman I was 17 years ago, desperate and dismissed, wasn't weak. She was the strongest person I'll ever know. And she deserves my gratitude, not my shame. Most importantly, I learned that the journey from rock bottom to the top isn't just about climbing. It's about transformation. About becoming someone who remembers what it felt like at the bottom and uses that memory not as a wound but as a compass, pointing always toward kindness, toward justice, toward the belief that everyone deserves a chance. I closed the journal and looked out at the city lights, at the life I'd built from nothing, at the peace I'd finally found. And I smiled. 3 years after I visited Jonathan Hutchins in the care facility, I stood in front of 200 people at a business conference and told my story. Not the sanitized version. Not the bootstraps and determination narrative that makes poverty sound like a character-building exercise. The real story. The one with cardboard in shoes and tears on bathroom floors, and the specific humiliation of being told you're not good enough by people who've never known struggle. The conference organizer had asked me to speak about overcoming obstacles in entrepreneurship. I'd almost said no. I'd built Morrison Technologies to prove something, yes, but also to move beyond the need for proving. Speaking publicly felt like reopening wounds that had finally healed. But Ethan had convinced me. Mom, there are people out there right now where you were 17 years ago. On floors contemplating surrender. At tables calculating which bill to skip. In meetings being told they're not enough. They need to hear that someone made it through. Not because it was easy, but because it was possible. So I stood on that stage with a microphone and 200 faces looking up at me. And I told them the truth. I told them about Michael leaving. About the Hutchins rejection. About working 87 hours a week and still sinking. About the moment I'd lain on my bedroom floor and almost gave up. I told them about the wedding ring I'd pawned for $180 and the business cards that said, CEO, when I was CEO of nothing. About my first client at a funeral and the slow, grinding accumulation of small victories that eventually became something substantial. I told them about hiring Ryan Hutchins. About visiting his dying father. About learning that forgiveness wasn't weakness but liberation. Here's what nobody tells you about success, I said, my voice steady even as emotion threatened to crack it. It doesn't erase the pain. It doesn't undo the nights you went hungry or the moments you felt worthless. Success doesn't heal you. What heals you is choosing, every single day, to believe that your circumstances don't define your worth. That other people's limitations don't have to become your own. That rock bottom is just the foundation you're building on. The room was silent. I could see faces in the crowd, some crying, some nodding, all listening with the intensity of people who recognized themselves in my story. I thought success would feel like revenge, I continued. Like vindication. Like finally proving to everyone who doubted me that they were wrong. And maybe for a moment it did. But you know what success actually feels like? Feels like responsibility. Because once you make it through, once you build something from nothing, you have an obligation to reach back and help the next person climbing up. After the speech, the line of people wanting to talk stretched across the conference hall. Single mothers, first-generation immigrants, people who'd been told they weren't educated enough, connected enough, privileged enough to succeed. One woman, maybe 30, with tired eyes that I recognized from my own mirror years ago, grabbed my hand. I have 3 kids, no degree, $300 in my bank account. I'm working 2 jobs and barely surviving. Tell me the truth. Can I actually do this? I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw myself at 26, desperate and dismissed. I can't promise you'll succeed, I said honestly. The statistics are still terrible. The system is still rigged against people like us. You'll face rejection and exhaustion and moments where giving up feels like the only rational choice. But here's what I can promise. If you survive long enough, if you refuse to let other people's doubt become your ceiling, if you build something, anything, that reflects your value rather than your circumstances, you'll discover something incredible. Not that you were special all along, but that you became special through the process of refusing to quit. That's the real transformation, not success. Survival that turns into strength. She cried, hugged her, gave her my card. The real one now, embossed and professional, light years from those first 500 I'd bought with my wedding ring money. Email me, I said. I can't give you money, but I can give you guidance. That's worth something. That night, in my hotel room, I video called Ethan. How'd it go? He asked. He was in his apartment. His girlfriend visible in the background making dinner. Good. Hard. But good. I met a lot of people who reminded me of us. Of where we were. Are you okay? Yeah. I'm grateful actually. For all of it. Even the terrible parts. Because those terrible parts taught me things that success never could have. They taught me compassion. Resilience. The difference between sympathy and empathy. How to recognize hunger in someone's eyes because I've felt it in my own stomach. That's beautiful, Mom. I've been thinking about something. About starting a program, a fund maybe, for single mothers trying to start businesses. Small loans with reasonable terms. Mentorship. The kind of support I needed but couldn't find. Ethan smiled. The Morrison Fund. The Second Chance Fund. Because everyone deserves one. I love it. When do we start? We. You think I'd let you do this without me? I'm an architect, Mom. I can help design spaces for the program. Co-working areas, childcare facilities, whatever you need. Let's build this together. Cried then. Happy tears. Grateful tears. The kind that come from realizing that the best revenge isn't success. It's becoming someone who gives others the chances you never had. 6 months later, the Second Chance Fund awarded its first grants. 5 women. $5,000 each. No credit check. No collateral. Just business plans and hunger and the willingness to try. At the award ceremony, I looked at those 5 faces and saw myself reflected back. Different ages, different backgrounds, different dreams. But the same fire. The same refusal to accept that poverty was a permanent condition rather than a temporary circumstance. You're not going to succeed because I gave you money, I told them. You're going to succeed because you already possess everything success requires. Courage, determination, and the stubborn belief that you deserve better. The money is just fuel. You're the engine. One of them, a woman named Maria with 2 kids and a dream of opening a catering business, raised her hand. What if we fail? What if we take this money and it doesn't work out? Then you'll have tried. And trying, really trying, giving everything you have to something you believe in, that's never failure. That's education. That's growth. That's proof that you refuse to let fear make your decisions. And if you need to try again, we'll still be here. Now, sitting in my office 17 years after that crushing meeting in the Hutchins dining room, I look at the wall where I've hung photos of every person the Second Chance Fund has helped. 43 faces so far. 43 people who were told they couldn't, and who did anyway. Tomorrow, Ryan Hutchins is being promoted to senior developer. He's earned it through talent and work ethic, through late nights and creative solutions. His father never got to see it. Jonathan died 18 months ago. His final words to his family reportedly about, "The woman who taught me what leadership really means." Tomorrow, Ethan is launching his first independent architecture project, a community center designed specifically for single mothers, with childcare and co-working spaces and everything his mother could have used when she was building her empire from nothing. Tomorrow, I'm meeting with investors about expanding the Second Chance Fund nationally. Because 5 women per year isn't enough. 50 isn't enough. There are millions of people out there being told they can't, being rejected by people in expensive chairs who've never known hunger, being dismissed because their circumstances don't match someone else's idea of what success looks like. And they deserve better. But tonight, I'm going to sit in my condo overlooking the river and think about the woman I was 17 years ago. The one who walked away from Windermere with nothing but rejection and rage. The one who lay on a floor contemplating surrender. The one who sold her wedding ring for $180 and believed it was enough to start a revolution. I want to tell her, you did it. Not the way you imagined. Not without scars. But you did it. And more importantly, you did it without becoming bitter. Without letting cruelty turn you cruel. You built something that matters. You became someone who lifts instead of crushes. That's the real victory. As the city lights flicker on across the river, I raise a glass of wine. The good kind now, the kind I can actually afford, and I whisper a toast. To everyone who was told they couldn't. To everyone still lying on floors, still counting coins, still believing that tomorrow might be different. To everyone who refuses to let other people's limitations become their own. May you find your $180. May you build your empire. May you discover that the journey from rock bottom to the top is the most important education you'll ever receive. And may you remember always to reach back and help the next person climbing. I finish my wine. Check my email. There's a message from the woman I met at the conference. The one with 3 kids and $300. The subject line reads, "I got my first client." I smile and type back, "Tell me everything." Because that's what this was always about. Not revenge. Not proving people wrong. But building a world where fewer people have to fight as hard as I did. Where being poor doesn't mean being powerless. Where a single mother with nothing but determination can become someone who changes lives. Outside, the city hums with possibility. With stories being written. With people making impossible choices that will define who they become. And somewhere out there, someone is lying on a floor, contemplating surrender, thinking they can't go on. I wish I could tell them what I've learned. You can. You will. And on the other side of this impossible moment is a version of yourself you can't yet imagine. Stronger, wiser, capable of things that seem impossible right now. Not yet, that person will whisper. Not yet. And that will be enough. So I ask you, have you ever been dismissed, rejected, or told you weren't enough? Have you survived something that should have broken you but didn't? Have you forgiven someone who never deserved it because carrying the weight was too exhausting? Share your story. Because someone out there needs to hear that survival is possible. That transformation is real. That rock bottom is just the beginning. The world is full of people waiting to tell you what you can't do. Be the person who proves them wrong. Not for them, for you. And for everyone watching who needs to believe that impossible is just a word, not a fact. Your story matters. Your struggle matters. And your success, when it comes, will matter not because it proves you were special, but because it shows everyone else that they can be special too. What will you build from your rock bottom?